I can have your attention, we're going to go ahead and start. Good morning, I'm James Marlowe. I'm the president of Southface. It's great to have you here in the room with us. It's great to have you on Zoom and those that will be viewing later on video. I always like being here in the Home Depot collaboration room. I've personally been in a number of meetings where transformational things happen in this room, where people put forward visions for their organization, where hard discussions happen, where a lot of thought leadership and a lot of things really came together as people looked each other eye to eye and worked on really hard, tough problems. So it's great to have you with us today. So when I envisioned the start of this leadership speaker series, we had, you might remember, Doug Shiplin, who was the first speaker in the series. And I thought about Brionté for our second speaker, because she is to me an example of true leadership, true thought leadership, but not just leadership in thought, but in action. She is involved in so many different things. I'm going to give a very brief introduction because I want her to tell us what's on her mind today. We are going to reserve some time at the end for questions. We will be passing the microphone around for those questions, so those on video and those remote can be sure that they're able to hear what we're doing. But I will mention two things. So I met Brionté pre-COVID, so however long ago that was, in the time warp of COVID. And we had coffee over on the west side, and we talked about her vision as a new leader of League Conservation Voters. I met her charming daughter, and there's a big, as often is the case with leadership of sustainability and policy in Atlanta, a Southface connection. So her husband had participated in trainings at Southface and had a pivotal career change after taking some of those trainings, so that there always seems to be kind of a backstory that relates to Southface and our thought leadership and our innovation, our convening and connecting, be that in the form of training, be that in the form of our policy and advocacy work. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Brionté McCorkle, a thought leadership career speaker for today. Thank you.
All right, y'all. So I like to name what's making me feel a little awkward when I get started. So, you know, it's awkward to be called a leader, right? I'm just out here trying to do good work, trying to save the planet, you know, no biggie. So it's an honor to be invited here to talk to you all about the work that I've been doing. Please feel free to write questions down. I tend to talk in circles for those of you who have spent any time with me, but the dots do connect, and so I'm happy to clarify any points that I might make today. And I wanted to start really with talking. I guess I'll first say what I'm currently doing is I'm the executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters. So GCV, if you see a green check mark GCV or blue check mark GCV, it's Georgia Conservation Voters. We're the state affiliate of the League of Conservation Voters. And I'm really excited to be in this particular position because it is, to me, like the culmination of all of the different things that I've done over my career in the environmental movement. And I think it's a really good place with all of the right levers to move us forward on climate action here in Georgia and environmental justice here in Georgia. So let me start with how I started in the field and then kind of talk through some key points, some pivotal points for me. So a decade ago, right, I was an intern here at Southface. This is my first, I know, right, time. This is my first gig, paid gig in the environmental movement. I was coming off of studying public policy at Georgia State. I took one class on global issues. There was a climate change section of that class, and I was very, motivated and moved and inspired to begin focusing on environment and climate change because of that moment. And so, coming out of college, I went straight into Southface because, to James' point, when you want to do something environmental, Southface is like the first thing recommended. Have you checked out Southface? So I was like, sure, I'll come get involved in the movement. At that point, my understanding of climate and environment was very, it wasn't well developed. I knew that we had a climate crisis. It's something I'd learned about, heard about growing up. I knew that changing climate was, more than just global warming. I knew that it was going to take a lot of effort to solve it. But to me, it seemed like there were some solutions out there that especially clean energy and in the energy space and green building, and I was wondering why we just weren't seeing more action on it. So being able to come here at Southface and get hands-on and start doing the work, it started to become clear some of the challenges that we have as people who want to take action on climate and environment. The first major challenge that I noticed was, I was very passionate about this, and the more that I learned, the more I realized that people of color were on the front lines of environmental pollution. They were, living near the toxic sites, dealing with unclean water, unclean air, and the health impacts of that. And when we think about climate change and we think about natural disasters and the different ways that it's going to manifest, I also realized that these same communities were the ones who were going to be impacted first, the hardest, and the least able to be resilient when it happens, the least able to bounce back. Yet, in every environmental space that I went into, there just were not a lot of people of color in the room. I'm happy to say that's changing. I really am. I can sit here and say objectively, I go in, I'm like, hey, my people, and it's great. And so, we still have some work to do, but I did notice that. And in trying to figure out how do we get more people of color into the environmental movement, I started learning a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we create more inclusive spaces and how we make sure that people are welcome. But the biggest takeaway for me was learning, about language and how we communicate about environmental issues. It gets very technical. I studied public policy, right? Like I was following the technical stuff. And my first major challenge with this was I was an organizer at Sierra Club, and I was working on transit expansion. And so I go into this community at 70% African American. I'm like, this is a great opportunity to engage and bring people in, and we're gonna, work on transit expansion, which I understood was something that we needed to do because, transportation is the top sector for carbon emissions in the United States. So we got to get people out of single passenger cars, and we need to get them in alternative modes of transportation, on public transit, et cetera. So I was like, I'm going to go into this community, and it's mostly African American, and this is an opportunity to really dig in on trying to advance an environmental solution with people of color. And I started off saying very technical things, right? Like I'm talking about carbon emissions in the transportation sector, and like we need to take single passenger cars off the road, and we need clean air and burn less oil, and like. The community was looking at me like, what is this woman talking about? What is she saying? We had meetings about transportation, and there would be people in the room, but they weren't resonating with what the language was that I had, learned to use up to that point. So then I really took a step back and realized, kind of wrestle with my role as an organizer. Yeah, I've got all this technical, knowledge, but it's not really effective in motivating people and inspiring people to get involved and to take action and help out. So I did what every great organizer should do, which is stop talking and listen. So we listened, and we had tons of listening sessions and surveys and events where, we really just gathered people's feedback and started to hear about how they were articulating their issue around transit and transit expansion. For them, it was about access and quality of life. It was about being able to, because for context, Clayton County, is one of the original 5 counties that could join MARTA. It did not choose to join MARTA, and it rejected that when Fulton and DeKalb approved it. Cobb, Gwinnett, Clayton all rejected MARTA. So that's the legacy of the little T that we got right now. And so, they had a bus system that the county had locally and was paying for locally, and then of course the economy kind of took a hit. The bus system kind of puttered on for a couple of years, and then finally the county's just like, no, we're going to end it. So people were really stranded in Clayton. They couldn't get to work, they couldn't get to school, people couldn't get, I was hearing things like men were being locked up, or people in general being locked up because they couldn't get to their probation appointments because the probation office was way at the bottom part of the county. Grocery stores, how do you do grocery shopping if you don't have a car? There were all these things, and then people, because there was no transit, moved, so they had this massive vacancy rate, which of course was fostering all types of crime and activity in their communities they didn't like. And so that's what really, we learned to talk about it that way. right? And we learned to meet the community where they were at by listening first and echoing back that language and being like, oh, and by the way, this is also good for the environment, right? So that particular campaign was incredibly successful. We did end up getting MARTA expanded in Clayton County. One of my proudest moments as an organizer, still brings tears to me to this day when I tell the story from start to finish. And so, by the end of the campaign, what's interesting is, people were saying, hey, and this is going to be good for the environment, so the community did pick up on that point, and it did matter to them that they were going to have cleaner air and that they were going to be burning less oil. But we just had to lead, let community lead and follow, give them the data, and then help them reach their own understanding and conclusion. And so that's really, now when I take on an environmental issue, that's what I try to do first. What does this community really understand about what I want to organize around? What are they listening? How important is this to them? And really making sure that we are using the language that's going to be accessible. So that really has been transformational for me. And as I said, I've seen the environmental movement get better and better at taking complex issues and making them a little bit simpler, explaining them, with graphics and videos and all these wonderful tools we have today. And I hope that we continue to do that. I hope we continue to do that. And I'm going to challenge everyone in the room, when you're talking to people and you find yourself going and saying some super technical stuff and using a lot of jargon and acronyms, look at the faces of the people who you're talking to. Are they following? Can you break it down? Can you slow it down? That was something that was really important for me. So continuing on, we started, figuring out how we could make the environmental movement more inclusive. Some of it's bringing POC into spaces that already exist. Some of it is just supporting POC to organize independently, the way that they want to organize around environmental issues. And so, we need people power in order to take action on climate. This is a big problem, right? One of the things that I've also learned about it is that, well, I'm going to come back to that point. I think it's really important that when people are in the room, what happens is the solutions become a lot more equitable. The transit expansion in MARTA in Clayton County would not have happened if we did not listen and if the community was not able to say clearly where they wanted the bus lines, because that was to them going to be the most sustainable system possible. The solution, in other words, the transit solution that we were advocating for would not have been sustainable. It wouldn't have been as effective if we did not engage that community, right? So the importance of having people at the table and in the room, and especially at POC when we're talking about environmental solutions, cannot be stated enough, right? They've got to be a part of shaping the solutions for the solutions to be sustainable. We could have thrown any number of bus lines up, right? MARTA had a plan for what the bus line could have looked like, but without extensive public engagement, which they did do extensive public engagement, they got feedback, and now they have a set of routes that work really well for what people need. And that's gonna create a solution that's sustainable and something that people can keep using. So it's really important that people are in the room because of that expansion in the quality of the solution that we ultimately end up advocating for and achieving. And so I keep thinking about solutions, right? If we're bringing people in the rooms and we're talking about different issues, a lot of times we spend a lot of time in defining the problem and like, this is what the issue is. But then, getting to the place of like, this is how we fix it is sometimes very complicated, and we don't have answers or solutions for every problem that we're trying to organize communities around. I want to be super clear about that. This is what I want to say here is we have kind of stumbled around in the environmental space, taking advantage of the opportunity that's right in front of us to move forward on climate action. And I feel like it's not often done in context, right? So we advocated on this transit expansion because transportation, top carbon emitting sector in the US. When you look at other sectors that are emitting carbon, you've got energy, you've got food and agriculture, and a whole number of other things. I was kind of learning about this stuff piecemeal, right? So started Southface, learned a lot about energy, went to Sierra Club, learned a lot about transit, and then I started thinking, well, what's actually going to be the most effective way to reduce carbon and also provide environmental justice for communities? What are the actual solutions that we're talking about? Because the more that inclusive it got and the more people that I talked to from different backgrounds, the more I realized like everyone's on completely different pages when it comes to what environment is, what climate change is, and what the solutions are. You know, if I talk to this room of people and say, hey, when you think about climate change, what are you thinking about? Y'all are probably gonna have some really great answers. But I can tell you within this room, everyone's answers are gonna be a little bit different. When I ask you, what do you think needs to happen to solve those problems? Same thing, right? Probably gonna have some great answers. Everybody's answer is gonna be a little bit different. You go into community and you're like, you know, when you think about environment and climate change, what comes up? Well, if you're in a coastal community, you're thinking about flooding. Guess what? If you're in the city of Atlanta, you're probably also thinking about flooding. You know what I'm saying? In a completely different way. You're thinking about water, you're thinking about air. So there's all of these different places and levers for us to take climate action. And for me, it was just like, we were just kind of stumbling. Oh, there's an opportunity to transit expansion here. Oh, we can get clean energy here. Oh, let's throw a bill out there. And I was just very like, okay, so but let's take a step back. Let's organize ourselves. Like, what's gonna be the most effective way to move forward? And, you know, one of the things that happened right around, you know, me taking this leadership position at GCV was the Drawdown book, right? I think that book has like been super helpful for helping us sort of get a lay of the land on all the potential solutions for climate and, you know, what's actually going to move us forward in like the biggest and most significant ways. That particular book was then taken and converted to Georgia Drawdown, and I'm sure y'all are familiar with that. I think that particular set of solutions or focus areas is what I'll say is really helpful, right? It gives us a sense of like, you know, what are the biggest opportunities in Georgia beyond just like what we think we can do right now, right? What should we be doing? And it's got your 5 areas: energy, transportation, building materials, land sinks. There's always one that like food and agriculture. So those are our 5 big buckets. And, you know, all of these are things that everyone is interested in, right? You know, when you bring in diverse rooms, all of these things will come up if you like survey people on what they're thinking about. And so when I look at those 5 solutions, I also am starting to think, okay, if we're looking at energy, what do we need to do in the energy space to, what needs to happen? Is it legislation that needs to pass? Is it regulation? Is it a policy change? Does that need to happen at the state level, the federal level, the local level? Do all levels need to act? And as I dig into the Drawdown thing, I started to realize like we have this issue where, you know, we have a very decentralized problem, right? And so the solutions are also very decentralized. You know, we can't just go up to, you know, the president and be like, pass this one thing and it'll fix all of our problems, right? This is something that, you know, we are going to need masses of people involved in, right, in different ways, because the amount of organizing that has to happen to get one bill passed as the legislature or one thing passed at a city council it's pretty tremendous, right? Going back to the Clayton County example, we were working to expand MARTA. The community knew it had a transit issue. They just didn't know what the solution was, right? They were like, we need transit. How do we get it? So we had to do this education campaign to be like, hey, you know, you can get transit. These are all the things that would be great if you had transit that would solve all these problems. The way that you get it is through your county commission, right? You know, people were like, county what? How many of y'all know your county commissioners? Just some, you know, okay, so, you know, we had to do all this work to be like, yeah, this is what a county commission is. These are elected officials, by the way, so you do have the ability and the right to go in and tell them what you want. You know, it also took an understanding of state legislation or state legislation at the state level, because we had to, the thing that allowed Clayton County to join MARTA was state legislation that was passed in the 70s, right? How many people are walking around the street like, yeah, you know, that MARTA bill from the 70s is a big opportunity. People don't know this stuff, you know what I'm saying? They don't know that there's legislation that's helping them do this thing, and that the way that they can get it is to talk to their county commission, right? It took a tremendous amount of education about, you know, just basic civics. And like, these are people that, you know, are elected, and this is where the county commission building is, and you can come in and you can make a public comment. It just took a lot of education. And, you know, ultimately, I just remember when we started that campaign, going into the county commission room, there was one person, maybe two people in the room. There was like a little pod of like people were really upset about dogs. I mean, it was a pretty serious issue. They have a lot of stray dogs, and they were taking them and, you know, killing them. I'm going to come back to that point. So there was a small group of people that were upset about the stray dog situation. But for the most part, the room was very empty. By the end of the campaign, and I say the end of the campaign really was when they voted to get MARTA, because what had to happen was the Clayton County Commission had to vote to put a referendum on the ballot, which then the public would vote on election day, right? So the public had to approve whether or not it wanted to join MARTA. But the only way the public could do that is if the county commission voted to put it on the ballot. So that's why the county commission became the playing field for this particular issue, right? So, you know, we would go in, nobody in the beginning. As the campaign went on, a few more people started showing up, like, oh, who are these folks? I do want to know these folks. And they realized when they were in there, this wasn't just, we were talking about transit, but there was all kind of stuff that was coming up in the county commission meetings, and I could just see people's light bulbs going off, like, oh my God, this is how I get my road problem fixed? Oh, you know, just like going down the list of all the things that they talked about, you know, before they got to the agenda item that they showed up for, which was transit. So the Clayton County Commission had a deadline by which they had to vote in order to put the referendum on the ballot. This has to do with ballot building, right? Secretary of State has to have so much time to compile ballots. So the Clayton County Commission needed to do it by like the 6th of June, right? Or no, excuse me, like the 6th of July. It was like, that was the date. So county commissions are going by as we get closer to that deadline. I mean, the room's getting fuller and fuller. People are starting to wait outside. Crowds are forming. You know, we got signs, T-shirts, everything like that. It's become pretty packed in there. And then I remember, you know, we got down to, it was like the last county commission meeting, and it was in late June, and everybody's there thinking this has got to be it, right? This is when they're going to put this referendum on the ballot. Ultimately, it was not when they put the referendum on the ballot. They did not vote on the matter. We all went home. We were all like, oh no, what happened? How are we gonna get this thing? What's gonna happen? So then they called a special meeting, because county commissions can do that, special called meeting. They called this meeting for July 5th, right? So as an organizer, we're like, oh Lord, we're stressed, right? Because this is the day after the 4th of July. People are traveling, people are generally distracted, and this is one of the biggest challenges of organizing, is distraction. You know, people have other things going on in their lives. As much as they care about their communities, sometimes, you know, telling someone, hey, in the middle of your festivities, can you come to this county commission meeting? It's a challenge. But you know what? The people wanted this transit. And so July 5th ended up not even being a big deal, because that building was packed. It was packed to the max. And people were lined up. I mean, it was like 30, 40 people ready to make public comments. People were like standing outside. I mean, like literally like barbecue in hand, you know, like waiting to see how the vote was gonna come down. And ultimately, July 5th, the day before that deadline, they did vote to put the referendum on the ballot. The room, like I just remember the explosion in the room of like excitement and the tears, and it was really great. And so I kept going to the county commissions meetings after that, because the vote didn't happen until November, just to kind of, you know, see what they were talking about and see how the conversation was evolving. And what I noticed was, even though we had gotten what we wanted, there were more people in that county commission room than had ever really been there. And even though, you know, they just wanted to know. Now they're asking about different things. The dog people learned from the work that we had done on transit, and they began their own campaign. They began packing the public comments about the dogs, and they ended up getting a no-kill policy after that, sometime after that, because they had learned from that model of organizing and civic engagement. That was a lot of work. It was so rewarding when we got it, because we knew once the referendum hit the ballot that, you know, people wanted this thing. It was going to pass. We did have to do organizing, get out the vote, et cetera. But I think it was just really illustrative for us to understand the amount of work that's going to have to go in to getting all of these solutions that we are asking for. You know, we're going to need organizing in communities. Sometimes things are going to go down to the county commission. Sometimes things are going to go to city hall. Sometimes things are going to be state legislation. Sometimes a business could actually just do something and make something very transformational happen. So I really wanted to frame the challenge. We have a decentralized problem. The solutions will be decentralized. But organizing is something that I feel passionately about, and I'm seeing it be better funded in Georgia. And I think that with organizing, with strategic partnerships with nonprofits like mine and Southface, that we are slowly building that, like, I think of it like a web, like a nebula of like activists that are able to, you know, move forward climate change. Sometimes it will be based on the opportunity in front of us, but now we have the context of the drawdown plan, and we can see, okay, this is going to help us move forward in this area. So that's kind of like what's framing my thinking right now. And so then I'm going to talk about the most recent thing. So, you know, how do we get more POC in the room? What are the actual solutions? How do we organize for all those solutions? The other big problem is resources, right? You know, at the end of the day, the Clayton County MARTA referendum was a vote to tax people 1%, you know, to fund transit. A lot of the environmental solutions we want cost money, right? They're just not going to be cheap, right? And so I was also thinking, well, how do we fund these things? Well, we know what we got to do. How do we fund these things? So we spent the better part of the past couple of years, well, I want to say it started in like 2021 into 2022. I'm sure maybe some of y'all were part of this, advocating to get federal funding for a big climate package, you know, climate action package, and environmental justice. And let me just say really briefly, like, I do distinguish between the two things, right? It's a little bit of a different set of activities to solve existing environmental pollution in communities versus the things that need to be done to solve, to reduce carbon emissions, right? Both things need to happen. So I think it's important that we don't conflate the two. But we were advocating for a big transformational legislation package that would move us forward in both areas. And so, you know, we were successful, you know, that was a big deal. We got the Inflation Reduction Act passed after months and months and months and months of organizing and meetings and calls and pressure on our federal legislators. Those were the people who were able to make that particular decision. And in the Inflation Reduction Act, and prior to that, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act also passed. It wasn't the climate one, we're considering the IRA, the climate one. But both acts combined are basically putting tons of money, like tons, billions of dollars, towards transformational energy, and there's transportation in there, there's environmental cleanup, Superfund site cleanup, there's just so much money, right? There's so much resources coming down that are going to help us take a giant step forward in solving these crises that are in front of us. I'm kind of excited, I'm really excited about this. I'm such a nerd, I ramble about this with random people at bars. You know, this is to me like, it's the New Deal moment, right? So back, you know, almost 100 years ago now, there was a point at which, you know, the US was at a crossroads, right? And we had leadership that decided to put a massive amount of investment into different types of infrastructure that have become the legacy of what we've lived with today, right? Every time you get in your car and you get on the highway, that was a decision point that was made 100 years ago. This package of money, to me, is that opportunity, right? How are we going to leverage this money to build a sustainable system that we will leave, and resilient, right? A sustainable and resilient system that we will leave for the next generation. This is the moment. We are the architects of that, and I'm really glad that y'all are here on this journey, and will continue to be here in any number of ways. I think that we're building the future, right? And there's nothing more exciting about that than that, to me. Okay, so all that said, these are things that have been very pivotal. I feel like I have a lot more direction than I used to, right? I feel like I know what I want to advocate for. I feel like I know how to bring people in the room and get the people power we need. I feel like we now have money. So we can, actually get real projects moving, and the focus of that money, I should also say the Justice 40 initiative is saying that 40% of the benefits from this money should go to disadvantaged communities. They have a very complicated definition of a disadvantaged community. They're doing all these ninja jumps because they can't say race. Supreme Court might strike it down. But all of these things to me are really good opportunities to get the future we want. So what is my role in the movement, As I was doing all of this, I was also wrestling with who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do with my life, right? I think we all wrestle with that often. I don't care how old you get. What's my legacy? We think about that a lot. I didn't know what role I wanted to play, but some things have stuck out. I really like organizing. I love sitting in rooms with people, listening to what's going on and helping them connect the dots between, oh, this is actually a flooding issue in my street, but this is connected to climate because of extreme weather events. What? And seeing the light bulbs kind of go off in people's minds, or even just hearing stories, little anecdotes about, why communities look the way that they do, I learned that there's a MARTA bus stop in one of our communities because a neighbor didn't like the neighbor across the street. And so he called MARTA and requested a stop right there in front of that guy's house. And so that stop was there for a really long time. I think that's hilarious. I love organizing. You just find out these little tidbits about people in life. And so I know that I want to keep doing that, bringing people together and helping people see power. That moment in the Clayton County Commission is so important to me because the eruption of joy when people realize if we come together and we put strategic pressure on our decision makers, we have enough power to get the things that we want. We said we wanted transit and we organized and we got transit. Reminding people that people are the most powerful thing in the system. Sometimes, we lose that because of the government and business and whatever, but people are the most powerful thing, whether we're organizing or we're making purchasing decisions, it is individuals who have the power, and I love it when people realize that. So organizing is going to be really important to me. Legislation is really important to me. Again, the MARTA thing, we needed legislation at the state level, and the county making that decision was also county level legislation, right? So we need the words on paper, that was why I didn't become a lawyer, because I was I don't want to wrestle with words on paper, and now I wrestle with words on paper all day. This is, the policies, the framework, the guidelines that we're putting together for how we are going to live our lives. That act of being involved in that and making sure those words say the right things and will result in the right outcomes is really powerful to me. I also think, I didn't really emphasize this in my story, but, the elected official part, the elections part of it, the accountability part of it, right? At the end of the day, the Clayton County Commissioners were elected officials, right? They all felt like they needed to be responsive to this issue because the public wanted it, and because, let's be frank, they wanted to get reelected. They didn't want to be the people that said no for what the people really wanted. They knew that there was going to be accountability down the line. And so this is, my one graphic that I did want to show is the cycle of accountability. That is what my organization is really focused on strengthening here in Georgia. So again, Georgia Conservation Voters. We're actually 3 different organizations. We're GCV, which is a 501c4 that does legislative work and produces a scorecard. We're Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund, which is the entity that does education and organizing in communities. And then we also have the GCV Action Fund, which is a political action committee, so that we can support people we think are going to get into office and do the right thing, and also do the work to get folks who are, roadblocks out of the way. And so, all of this organizing, giving the community education, showing them the decision makers, helping them articulate the issue, that sits in the education fund. That hopefully is like feeding into the community asking for what they want, which a lot of times needs legislation, right? And then we got to tell people, hey, these people did or did not do what you wanted them to do. And so the best way to hold them accountable is to vote for or against them to get them out of office, because that's what they're responsive to. Politicians are responsive to, people voting them in or out of office. I'd like to think they all do the right thing just because it's the right thing, but they do the right thing, especially when they know the public's behind them. And so the public, back to them, right? Making sure that they're informed. And it's a cycle of engagement, organizing, legislative, political work, and it continues. And so we're still in our infancy. I took over in 2019. I was by myself all of 2019. I hired organizers in 2020, and we were ready to go. And then the pandemic hit, and so we did digital organizing like everyone else, and we're excited for it being 2023 and people coming back together in ways that make them feel comfortable. And now we have this tremendous playing field, and I'm excited about that. So I'll stop chatting, but that's my little speech here today.
So I hope you brought some questions. I'm going to hand the mic around. Who wants to go first?
Go first. Quite the mic. Hi. So, what is your? I'm interested in how you pull in people from the community, how you attract them, and get them to join you in groups and conversations and meetings to get their input. So, what is your strategy behind outreach into a community?
It's a really good question. So let me think. So I think first thing is, you have to make it look fun, right? I've actually just finished reading this book, Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown. It's some of it is about sex, but not all of it's about sex. It's about how we create joy, for ourselves, especially as activists and organizers. And one of the things that I think is a really important takeaway is that people want to do stuff that's fun, that brings them joy, that makes them, feel excited and fulfilled, right? If I say, hey, come to this meeting about climate change, people think, I'm already pretty anxious about that. I'm gonna skip that thing, because it doesn't sound fun. If you're like, hey, let's party for climate, okay, you're gonna get way more people in that room, So we try to be really creative with how we craft our events so that they seem like, things that we're gonna come and we're gonna have some fun at, we're gonna learn about an issue, but we're also, just gonna be in community and enjoy each other's company. Free food is also really important, just to be clear, people like to eat, okay. If it's an appropriate venue, having some beverages is always fun, which also helps people be a little bit more comfortable talking about complex issues. So there's also that, and then there's the language. Again, we've been organizing around the Public Service Commission, and the Integrated Resource Plan and the rate case. And so none of our events said, hey, come learn about the Public Service Commission and the Integrated Resource Plan and the rate case. It was like, hey, bills are too high. Right? Let's come talk about high energy bills. That was the access point for people in the community. They were like, yeah, I want to come talk about that. So, people came, ready to tell the stories about how they're dealing with $300-400 utility bills and how they get cut off and have to pay all these fees. And it's this tremendous amount of strain on top of, the increase in prices everywhere else, right? And then we're like, did you know the Public Service Commission is making these decisions? Did you know that you can come talk to this Public Service Commission, that they are elected officials and that they should be accountable to you? And that's, then we do the education from there. So it just, you have to, back to language, right? We didn't say, come learn about the integrated resource plan. It was like, hey, bills are too high. Let's talk about that. And because that's the access point for this particular community. So you have to kind of know a little bit about your community, try to use the right language, try to craft events that sound fun and don't sound like a lot of work, and create the right setting. I think also telling people childcare is provided, if you can do that, is helpful. As a parent, I lug my kid around, and people don't want to be a burden, and so if they know, oh, your kid is welcome, they'll feel welcome, they'll want to come. So we actually do that. Try to get childcare providers, and then sometimes we just help people with transportation. People want to come, they don't have a car, or they live out of town, they don't have a place to stay. So I've had to really fight in my not fight, my board's with me on this, but I've pushed for a budget that allows us to provide that kind of support for community convening, because we know that these are barriers for people coming together and engaging. So.
Do you have a time that you think is better, like the daytime or evening? What has been your success? Or...
Yeah, it's a good question. We do a little bit of all the things. We have events during the day. We have events at night. We have events on the weekends. People will convene as long as you can make it easy for them to do so. Not everyone works a 9 to 5, especially in the lower income communities that we're working in. A lot of them are shift workers, so they can gather in the middle of the day. I think what's important is giving people multiple opportunities for engagement. You can't just have one meeting and be like, we're done. That's actually something, big pet peeve of mine, the public engagement space, organizing around, transit meetings and things like that. Well, we had a meeting and no one came. Okay, well, yeah, because you had one meeting. All right, you need to have multiple opportunities for people to engage different times of the day and in different formats. Sometimes we're having a party. Sometimes, we're
want to lower our bills.
Right. Sometimes tabling and outreach at communities. And then sometimes, we have a workshop, where people understand they're going to be like filling out public comments or something like that. So it just, multiple points of engagement, different types of engagement. And the most exciting thing is you're going to get different people at different times. You'll find you'll start to develop a core of people that'll keep coming back, and those become people that we can nurture to be community leaders, and then they become their own little ambassadors for engagement in their community as well. So,
do you ever have politicians come to your? I mean, are you more about the issue, or do you ever have candidates that are?
Yeah, so our education fund is definitely about focus on education. And, it's definitely focused on the issue at hand. We do have elected officials come a lot, sometimes they just want to learn, right? I just want to, a good example is Linda Pritchett. She just became a city councilwoman in the city of South Fulton. She wanted to know about power bills because her community has a very high energy burden, right? They're spending a lot of their income paying power bills. So she came to a couple of events, and after the Georgia Power rate case, I think it was either CBS or Fox or somebody interviewed her. And she felt really grateful. Personally texted me, she said, hey, thank you so much. Like, I know I can speak on this now, because they were asking her how she felt about these high power bills and what it meant for her community. And because she came to the meeting, she knew. She could articulate clearly how she felt and how her community felt there. So we do get elected officials. I think Linda's a great example. We also get folks who just want to be seen. Yeah. Oh, there's some people gathering over there. Put my running for office tag on. But that's okay. The fact that elected officials are present means that we're talking about issues that their people, their constituents care about, right? And I think that's important. The C4 does more of the political work, right? As I speak right now, I have a team of people at the Capitol. Actually don't know if they're in session today, but they're rubbing shoulders. They're talking to elected officials. They're actually working actively to set up an environmental caucus, because the way that bills are introduced at the Capitol, they go through issue committees, and those are kind of, they're not really the best format for talking openly about and learning about issues, right? Once the bill comes in committee, it's like, let's get this thing passed, not like, let's have a conversation about climate change and kind of explore what the options are to deal with that. So we're trying to create a caucus for that. So that will be a very intense elected official organizing, right? That's going to have to happen. So hopefully that answers both y'all's questions.
So on a related note, if you have a group going into like a new community that you don't have experience with or you haven't worked with before, how would you start your outreach? Where would you go to connect with people and to bring them in?
So I love that, we get to operate within an ecosystem of nonprofits that do wonderful work around a lot of different issues, right? I'm the environment and climate, person, but one of my favorite partners is Black Voters Matter. So we'll be like, hey, like, we're about to go to this community and we'll put feelers out and, does anybody, like, who do you know in Albany, Georgia? And like, oh, well, Black Voters Matter is organizing there. You should talk to the Southwest Organizing Project. You should talk to 9 to 5 working women because they've been doing a lot of organizing there. So then we like kind of leverage those partnerships and then, get connected with the people that they have on the ground. We start talking to them. They'll introduce us to community members. And then it's like, hey, y'all should do something at this church on this day. And then we make it happen. And that's how it works. You kind of see who's already out there, who's already doing work, which I think is, really important first step. A lot of organizations don't do. We ask our partners and we try to get, on the ground connection and yeah, and then the work kind of evolves from there.
Question from online. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey there, Brionté. It's Katie. Good to see you. I'm so glad you mentioned the IRA funding and implementation work that we're doing with you all under the SFCI, State to Federal Climate Initiative Project. I was wondering, of course, if you could share a bit about the PSC voting rights suit and how that fits into this larger context that you're speaking about, supporting community-based solutions, as well as share, if you can, if there's time, your plans for organizing around that in 2023 and how Southface can support it.
Yes. So, I was looking at my watch, but I don't know if I'm gonna do this in 2 minutes. So bear with me. The voting rights, Public Service Commission voting rights lawsuit. So we do engage in the Public Service Commission. Energy is a really important lever for climate action here in Georgia. And we've engaged in the rate cases, integrated resource planning processes. And we've been doing that for a while. I started about a decade ago, but people have been doing it for decades prior to that, we're not really getting the progress that we want to see at the Public Service Commission. We seem very clearly in the, put it frankly, like in the pockets of Georgia Power, and they're just going to do what the power company wants them to do. And so even their narrative around, oh, well, we lowered the rate case or we included so many megawatts of solar. Well, that was a concession that was negotiated with Georgia Power behind those doors, right? Like that's how I feel. And I felt about that. So, I get sometimes you got to beat a brick wall a few times before it comes down, but my head hurts. So I was like, what are we going to do that's different? Why are the commissioners not, responsive to the public? And so I went back to their charter and, they are the Public Service Commission. They have, responsibility to make sure that the power company and, utilities are not exploiting the Georgia consumer. They also have a responsibility to make sure that they're well-run companies and that they're responsible and they're operating. I think they take that part of their job more seriously than they do the people part. They're elected officials. So I was like, why are they not in line with their public? Because energy burden is a statewide issue in Georgia. This isn't something that's only affecting Metro Atlanta. It's not something that's only affecting poor Black people, right? It's affecting people of all racial and ethnic groups across all geographies in the state. So I didn't understand, if you ask people, hey, should you raise the bills? People are going to say, no. So why are they so out of step? And so I started to look at the election structure. It's a statewide election, even though they're a district. So why are they district? What are the districts for if it's a statewide election? Basically, if I live in District 3 in Atlanta, my representative is supposedly the District 3 person, who's currently Fitz Johnson. However, Fitz Johnson is in that seat, or let's put his predecessor, Chuck Eaton, was in that seat, not because people in District 3 like Chuck Eaton. People in District 3 voted Chuck Eaton out every single time they had the opportunity, but they didn't have enough votes because their votes were being diluted statewide. Someone in District 1 was voting for Chuck Eaton, So someone who is not in the district is voting for the representative of the district and keeping them in that position, even though we had clear data showing the people who live within that district continually attempted to vote it out. And had it been a district-based election, they would have been successful, right? He lost in that district every time if you just look at those votes. But because it's a statewide election, everyone else is keeping him in that seat. This makes them a lot less responsive to the needs of that particular district, right? I don't have to keep them happy. I just have to keep winning a statewide election. You know, the electoral dynamics there are very different. So we filed a Section 2 Voting Rights Act lawsuit challenging the structure of that particular election. What we're looking for is more representation on the commission. We want people who truly feel accountable to the districts that they represent. And, you know, we want people to have a fair shot at electing people that really represent them. So the Section 2, it basically protects voters against vote dilution, which is what I just explained. We have taken this issue all the way through court. We had, you know, hearing last year in June, and in August, the judge ruled in our favor that the Public Service Commission is a violation of the Voting Rights Act and its current structure, and he ordered the state legislature to work with the Secretary of State to remedy that election. The state did appeal that particular, so let me be clear, that's why we didn't have a Public Service Commission election on the ballot. When we were going to, you know, get our senator and our governor, there was supposed to be a Public Service Commission race, but my lawsuit was the reason why it got pulled down. The state did appeal that ruling, and we had that appeals hearing in December. And so, you know, we're waiting on the appeals court. I hope the appeals court upholds the ruling, which means that the Secretary of State would have to work with the legislature to fix and redesign that race. What specifically they need to do is not ordered, it's up to them. I hope it's district-based elections. I think that's the fair thing. But the appeals court could also vote against us, at which point we would appeal. And we would go back and forth, and we're not gonna give up until, you know, there's no path forward, and hopefully, you know, the court sides with us and we can avoid that. But essentially, that's what's going on. And the Public Service Commission is, they just had a rate case. They're considering local cost overruns next year. There'll be, you know, more integrated resource plans and more rate cases. So, you know, we're hoping to have better representation on the commission, and we need to figure out what the election structure is going to look like, and it's all dependent on this court case and what the legislature decides to do if they have to redesign the rates. So,
Can I ask you really quick, what model do you think is the best for that? Is it 5 commissioners or should it be more? I mean, and I'm wondering how many people outside of our little community really care about the Public Service Commission of all the elected officials. You know, there are some like dog catcher, I don't care who has that job, that kind of thing, you know. What's your thought?
I have this question and I'll wrap it up. I think district-based elections is the fairest outcome, right? If there's 5 districts, then great. The people who live in District 3 vote for the district to be commissioner, and no one else does, right? That's how state legislative districts work, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think is the fairest outcome. You know, if we're doing that, then what happens is, you know, based on the districts that currently exist, you would have at least one district that was, you know, majority, minority, that would be the District 3 seat, and that's at least one person that can offer a dissenting viewpoint in the room, and the power of one voice in a room just cannot be stated enough. So just having at least one advocate within the commission to advocate for people is really powerful. So that's what I hope the outcome is going to be, but our legislature is very creative. Okay, they can come up with any number of things. And then briefly answer your question, do people care? People did not know, and still many don't, what a public service commissioner is. And I think we've had some opportunities like the 2021 runoff with the 2 senators, it was Ossoff and Warnock. And there was also Daniel Blackman, who was running for public service commission on that ballot. People for the first time, well, what is this thing? What is this third thing? You know, we didn't quite get that third race over the hill, but it elevated it. The lawsuit re-elevated it. People are like, wait, Public Service Commission voting rights, all these voting rights lawsuits, the one that's successful is this one about this Public Service Commission. People are curious about that. And then let me be clear, you know, no matter what, there will be a Public Service Commission election this year, whether the state says keep using the old rules or legislature fix it. This is gonna be the hottest thing in town. We're not fighting with the governor and a senator's race for attention. Now this is an opportunity to put the spotlight on the Public Service Commission and say, these are your elected officials. They are making decisions about your power bills. And guess what? They've raised them like crazy and everyone knows it and is feeling it. So this is an opportunity for education, like no other. So I'm excited about it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're out of time, but I wanted to say, thank you. Can we have a round of applause?